Hey, it's Professor Gould. In this video, I'm going to talk about the markings that we see on the anterior human skull. And let's just start by naming the bones that we can clearly see here. We have the mandible, which is your jawbone. Okay, that's the only movable bone on the skull. We have two maxilla, left and right. And remember, when we're looking at bones, always look for the suture so you can see where one bone ends and the next begins. That's the suture right there between the left and right maxilla. Inside the nasal cavity, we can see part of this vertical plate or perpendicular plate of the vomer, which makes part of the nasal septum. And we can see a little bit of the two bones here. These, let me get my pointer, these are the inferior nasal conchae, C-O-N-C-H-A-E is plural, concha is singular. And if you're thinking, wait, didn't we learn about those in the nasal cavity? We did. These are separate bones that make those folds. I'm going to come back because we have actually lost most of one of the bones that makes this part. All right, going up, we have two nasal bones right there that make the bridge of the nose. There's a suture in between, and then if you look very carefully, you can see a suture right along the edge there. The next part of this bridge of the nose is made by a process of the maxilla. And you remember our naming system for processes is where it's going to, process of, bone it's part of. So this one actually comes up, and you can see a suture here. It connects to the frontal bone. So this is the frontal process of the maxilla. And then next is a bone that's really pretty broken on these skulls. You can kind of see this one. It's called the lacrimal bone. Hang on, let me switch skulls for these. Let's have a fake skull for this one. All right, this is a plastic skull. Not as great for some markings, but yeah, these little fragile bones here don't get broken. All right, so we have nasal bone, frontal process of the maxilla. You can see those sutures very clearly there. And then you see this little bone right there. That is the lacrimal bone. Lagrima in Spanish means tears or cry. I don't remember which one. This is the lacrimal bone. Lacrimal means crying or tears. And this is where your tear duct empties, and that hole right there goes into the nasal cavity here. And that is where the nasolacrimal duct drains. All right, so nasal, frontal process of the maxilla, lacrimal bone. This part back here is part of the ethmoid bone, and then a lot of this is part of the sphenoid bone, okay? Things that we can see inside this circle here is called the orbit, okay? The orbit holds the eye and all the muscles and nerves associated with the eye. We have three main holes in the orbit. Two of these are really long and narrow. You remember long, narrow holes are called fissures. So this is the inferior orbital fissure. What do you think the other one is called? The superior orbital fissure right there. Okay, so those are the long, narrow holes. Then there is this hole there that is round. Okay, see that? And if we look very carefully at it, and we put our little pointer through there gently so as not to damage anything, we find that that comes out in the interior right there. That is the optic canal. That's where the optic nerve goes through. How cool is that? Okay. All right, let's see what else we have. We have a hole right here under the orbit, and we have a notch right here over the orbit. On this side, it's almost a hole. Okay, this is the infraorbital foramen, and this is the supraorbital, and depending on its shape, it's either a notch or a foramen. In some skulls, it's a complete hole, okay? In some, the opening, like the inferior part, isn't solid, and so it's a notch. And so whether it's a hole, a foramen, or a notch depends on whether that is a complete hole or not. Okay, so supraorbital foramen, infraorbital foramen. The other thing that we need to recognize is see how there's an edge. There's an edge to the orbit here. That's called the orbital margin. And a margin just means an edge. I'm trying to get my camera to focus. Can you focus on that? Sometimes it doesn't want to focus. Okay. So the orbital margin is that edge. Okay, so when on quizzes and labeling, remember that you need to be very careful about what part you're talking about. What else do we have? Okay, we have the zygomatic bone here. Okay, the zygomatic bone makes the apples of your cheeks, and it has 3 processes that connect to other bones. So remember our system, bone it connects to, of the bone it's part of. So these are all going to be of the zygomatic bone. This one, we've got a suture right there. So what bone is this? That's the maxilla. So this is the maxillary process of the zygomatic bone. It connects to, hey, there's a process on the maxilla that connects to the zygomatic. So this is the zygomatic process of the maxilla. Get it? Okay, now what about this one? This one connects to this bone, goes all the way across your forehead. That's the frontal bone. So this is the frontal process of the zygomatic bone. There's our suture. This is the zygomatic process of the frontal bone. Okay, not all the way up here, just this little part that sticks off. One interesting thing I want to note right there, this skull has what we call a sutural bone, which is a separate bone that's in the suture. Okay, those, we don't usually see them here, but we often see them in the lambdoid suture. Okay. Let's go back to the nasal septum. On this one, we can see all the parts of the nasal septum. So you can see the vomer here, the perpendicular plate, and then up here, this is the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid bone. There's the cribriform plates of the ethmoid bone, and the olfactory neurons actually go straight through that cribriform plate into this cavity here. The inferior nasal conchae there, okay? We have middle nasal conchae here, and then this skull, they didn't make superior nasal conchae, so I'm not that excited about that. All right, other things that we see on the anterior skull, I'm going to show you this on the real skull. Here we go. Okay, the focus is so much better on this one. All right, this little indentation in the middle of the front of the forehead, that is the glabella. Okay, and then we have, look, this one is an actual foramen. You can see that it's solid there on the edge. So that is a supraorbital foramen. This ridge right here is the superciliary arch. That's where your eyebrows go. Cilia, hairs, superciliary. So up and hairs is what that means. And I think that is all of the markings that we want to know on the anterior skull. That was so long. Okay.